Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'll start with a quick overview of today's agenda. We'll begin with an introduction to the new Workflow Designer, highlight what has changed in the latest release, and touch on some key use cases and customer values. From there, we'll move into a live demo presented by our head of engineering, Shai Peter, and then wrap up with a Q&A. Throughout this session, please feel free to submit any questions in the chat. We'll address them during the Q&A at the end, and or follow up afterwards with an email if needed. Before we jump into the demo, I want to quickly introduce the new Workflow Designer. This release is all about making workflow setup much clearer and more intuitive. The main goal here was to simplify how users create, edit, and reuse workflow logic without having to jump between multiple settings pages. With the new experience, you can create, update, or select activities directly inside the Workflow Designer itself. That means users no longer need to leave the designer to go into separate activity settings just to make changes. We've also brought triggers, conditions, and activities into a single flow designer, so everything is managed in one place. This gives users a much clearer view of the full workflow from start to finish. And also, there is another key improvement, which is usability. The interface is cleaner, definitely, and descriptions are more visible in the flow itself, and properties can be edited in a side panel, making updates much faster and easier. Overall, this is designed to reduce friction, improve visibility, and make workflow building more efficient for both new and experienced users. Now that we've introduced the overall goal for the new Workflow Designer, I want to look at what is actually new in this release and why it matters. The biggest change is the move to a unified workflow setup page instead of jumping between different areas to manage activities, triggers, and workflows. So everything now is in one place. That makes the experience definitely, more streamlined and much easier to follow, and so. All the main workflow components now live together, including activities, scheduled workflows, and both user-triggered and automatic workflows. Users can also create and reuse conditions and activities directly within the designer itself. So without having to break the flow or switch contacts. So now it's, everything in one place, and it's just that. So we've also added improvements that make the experience more scalable as workflows grows. So users can now search, filter, and group workflows by trigger type and activities to reuse them in much clearer and visible usage indicators. Another key enhancement is support for if and else logic within activity groups. And this gives users more flexibility to model more realistic workflow scenarios. So, and from a business and user perspective, this matters because it helps teams build faster, reduce complexity, and keep automation logic where the work actually happens. It actually helps improves maintainability as well and make ownership much clearer over time. This is my one last thing before we move into a demo. We want to highlight how the audit app can actually be a bonus here with the workflow. So as the workflow was introduced, like the new workflow designer is introduced, we want to also highlight that the audit app that is part of Provision Point can also help customers monitor and manage their workflows after they have built it. So with the audit app, teams can get centralized visibility across workflows and workspaces, making it much easier to understand overall workflow activity and health across the environment. So for example, You can track key workflow metrics such as, whether workflow is enabled, when it last ran, and how many instances are currently in progress, how many have completed and how many have failed. This gives admins, the business owners a much clearer operational view without having to manually investigate each workflow one by one. So this is especially valuable for identifying issues, early spotting bottlenecks, and understanding usage and adoption trends over time. So if a workflow, for example, failing repeatedly, not running as expected, or showing unusual in-progress counts, the audit app can definitely help with that. So with that, I will hand it over to Shai for the live demo, and feel free to drop your questions as we go in the chat.
Thank you, Fadwa. Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen. And just like Fadwa said, I'm going to run through the demo. If you have questions, drop them in the chat. I'm going to try to keep an eye on the chat. But Fadwa, maybe you can jump in and interfere in case I miss a question. Again, this is a session for partners. Questions and answers are very, very important in those kinds of sessions. So feel free to interrupt. The way I want to run this demo is I'm going to show you what kind of workflow we've built here in our meeting requests. And by the way, the entire demo flow, how to build it, how to create those workflows, is in our documentation site. Let me drop a link here so you can all see that. So we have that demo script in our, oh, sorry, wrong page. This one, sorry, here we go. Found it. Here you go. So in our documentation site, there is a KB that talks about how we built this workflow, and it describes exactly that. So if there's anything here you want to see in more details, you can see the full script and step-by-step guide on how to build this workflow. I'm going to run this workflow quickly and jump in between the meeting request workflow and the settings pages to show you the changes that we actually made to the designer and explain a little bit about them. And then I'll show you how to create maybe a couple of workflows if we still have time. Is there a question? Sorry, no. All right. So this is a very simple expense report list where employees can come in here and create a new expense report. You'll notice that when I'm creating an expense report, the workflows and the forms are part of one another. So in the entire approval workflow and creating an expense and sending it for approval, the line is very blurred between the workflows and the forms. So for the end user, the experience is very intuitive. So I'm going to go and create an expense report. You see that I only have the expense information to fill in, and I can say that I had a good lunch with Fadwa, or yeah, let's do with a client, and expense type would be lunch. And I'm going to report it on yesterday, and it was $250. It was a big client. I wanted to impress them. And I had the flight, round trip flight to meet the customer. And the flight cost me, I don't know, $350, $1,350. And I'm accidentally going to report it on tomorrow. And when I'm going to try to create this expense, so a part of the experience is that I get validations right there on the form to tell me those things will not get approved. So instead of me submitting an expense and getting a rejection because, hey, you can't do a lunch over $50, we get custom validations in the form to reduce the load of the workflow, to reduce mistakes in the workflow, help the user fill in his request correctly. And by the way, we can add information like you have to have at least one attachment, don't forget to upload your invoice, and stuff like that. So you can see that already I prevented a whole cycle of workflow being rejected just because of that. And obviously another validation that I can't report a flight in the future. It doesn't make sense. I'm going to put the flight a day before we had lunch. And now that my submission is ready, I'm going to try to save this expense as a draft. And there you go. I created a new expense, and automatically, without selecting anything, the status is draft. You might have noticed I can't even see or change the status of the item itself. The next time I'm visiting that expense, I can edit the item. I can still edit it. Let's say I want to add another expense. I'm not ready to submit it yet. I can add a few more rows if I want to. And when I'm ready to, I can actually click submit for approval. So let me close this again, and now I'll do the submit for approval. Once my expense is ready, you see that I only have one workflow available to me. It's a user-triggered workflow. It's called submit for approval. And when I click on that, I get a form. And the form behaves a little bit different than the way it behaved before. So if I'm editing an item or creating an item, if it's in draft mode, I get the expense tab and I can edit anything I want there. When I'm trying to submit something for approval, I get a new tab in here. So first of all, there's this steps visibility based on whatever workflow I'm running and whatever status the item is in. I can now view the status of the submission because it's relevant, it's changing, it's dynamic, but I still can't edit it. And as you notice, the approver field is now required. So I'm going to put myself as an approver just so we can have an easy demo. And once I request something for approval, you see the comments are not required at this point. And I can go ahead and hit finish and submit this one for approval. And as soon as the form submits, I am going to have an item in pending, in submitted status. Oh, and you just heard the email coming in. This is my action required email. Very simple email template. Just tell me, hey, please review and approve this item. Clicking on it will open the view item so I can quickly review it. I can actually put links directly to approve and reject to those actions specifically. So here's the item. When I open it from the email, I can still go to the list and get the same experience when I'm viewing an item that's in status submitted. And very importantly, because it's submitted and I am the user that's supposed to approve it under the approver, I get a few more actions like the approve and reject. If I go and view an item that somebody else needs to approve, I will not have the approve and reject. I'll just have the comment activity, and I'll show you what those do. They do something really, really cool. Now when I'm coming to view an item and it's in status pending approval and I'm an approver, I can no longer edit it. If I'm going to go and click edit on the item, you'll see that I only have a choice of those three actions. I can either approve, reject because I'm an approver, or I can add comments on the item. I can no longer change the expenses, add more expenses, or do things like that with the item. If I'm going to hit reject, and I'm just going to try to submit it, you'll see that it's not going to fly because when I do reject, the comments are required. So there's logic built into the workflow and to the form together that creates one big flow for the user. For the user itself, you don't really know where the workflow starts or begins, where the form's logic starts and begins. It all aims to deliver one experience to the user. So it's very intuitive, and you don't have to train me to know how to use this list. It just tells me if you're rejecting an item, you have to provide comments, right? Which makes sense. If I approve, I don't have to do that. So if I'm going to click approve, I can go ahead and submit it without even visiting the approval tab. I'll show it to you real quick. See, the comments are not required. Status is going to be approved automatically, but theoretically, just come in here, review everything that I want to review, and hit finish, and that's it. Item's going to be approved. Now, the last thing I want to show you before I'm jumping to show you the settings of how this was created is the comments action. What do we do with an item that's already been approved? So right now there's no approver. No one can approve or reject the item. And if I click and view it, basically I only have the comment action. Oh, I'm actually also in this demo part of the accounting team, quote unquote, so I can also mark it as paid. So you see another action here. But if I try to edit the item, again, we have to block editing the item. You'll see that I can no longer edit the full item. When I just click edit item, I'm actually going to run the comment workflow. So I can only add comments and trigger the add comments workflow, and that's it. Can no longer edit. If I do want to mark it as paid, I have to click on the pay, and then it'll be marked as paid. So I'll do that just to show you how the flow finishes. And once it's marked as paid, you see when I click pay, there's no form, there's no UI, I'm just marking that, oh, we actually submitted this for payment, so let's just be done with this, and we take it off our view. We can remove it from the list view. Obviously, those fields are blocked for edit when you do edit in grid, unless somebody messed with my demo. Yeah, there you go. Fields are read-only. You can't edit them on the form. You can't edit them in the list view. Now, unless there's any questions or anything specifically you want to see, I want to show you how this was built and the tools and steps we took to build this. So I'm heading over to our list settings. You get to it by clicking the KWIZ Apps button here at the list. You go to our list settings, and most of what we've done is done here in the workflows. This is the first point where we go and configure things to create our workflows. And then later on, things we create in here, we can use them in other settings and configuration, and I'll explain in a minute. So this is our new workflow designer. We used to have 3 settings blocks, like Fadwa said. We used to have a block for configuring activities, a block for configuring automatic and user trigger workflows, and a separate block for configuring scheduled workflows. We've combined them all together into one spot, and we've noticed another thing. We used to just show you the name of the workflow, the description of what it's supposed to do, and we noticed feedback from customers that after a while, you may change your workflows. People don't really go and make sure they give the best description or the best title to the workflow. So we're trying to create a view that'll give you a high-level view of your workflows and be able to know what they do, when they run, more or less, without having to go into each and every one of them specifically. This is very useful when you're trying to make changes into your process. So let's say the payment process has to have an approval as well, or you want to have a second level approval for your flow. So the first thing you'll notice in here is that when we view our workflows, you can see that we have an available when section that shows me when is this workflow running. So this is very easy for me to see and say, oh, okay, so I have a workflow here that's always available, and I have a workflow here that's available only when the item is draft. So this one's going to be available, sorry, not equal to draft, so I can comment when the item is not in draft. You know, it's very easy for me to come in and say, oh, you know what, I have a problem with this one. This one is not showing on a new item, why? And I can very easily say, oh, you know what, the trigger configuration or the conditions are wrong. So that's the first thing we've done in here. Now, when we go and edit a workflow, let me open one for edit, so bid for approval, for example. You'll also see that we changed the flow of editing a workflow as well. So this is the side panel where Fadwa mentioned, where we do all the things we used to jump between different pages to configure. So the first thing you do with a workflow is configure its trigger. So you still have those 3 triggers that we had before. You just choose and switch in between them. Now, my personal recommendation, for example, is if you want to create an automatic workflow or a scheduled workflow and you just want to test it, I always create them as a user trigger workflow, make them available only to me, test them, make sure they do what I want them to do, and then I'm flipping them over into an automatic or scheduled workflow when I really want them to run. So this is where you choose your trigger type. You give it a name and a description, trying to be as helpful as you can. And at the bottom here, we have that little checkbox that says show edit form before running this section. This is the difference between the workflows that I clicked on them and asked me to fill in some information, or the pay workflow where it just went ahead and did some changes without showing me a form. So this is the checkbox right here. One more interesting thing about this checkbox, if I just check it, it'll show me the entire form and respect the column level, group level permissions that we have set based on the workflow settings. But the comments workflow, for example, only wanted, and it was only meant to show one column called comments. Let's say comments and title. So you can also choose the columns you want to show right here, and then you're creating actually a workflow form that only shows those specific columns without having to go ahead and create a new display group for them or column level permission to hide them. So this is another handy settings that we have here on a user workflow. Obviously, an automatic workflow doesn't have a user form at all. The second part of the trigger, which all triggers have, is the conditions. We set the conditions in here. When do we want them to run? pretty straightforward. And then we go down here into what does the workflow do on the server side. So again, if your workflow has a form on the client side, those operations get completed before you submit the workflow. So by me clicking request approval, I'm opening the form. The workflow hasn't started yet. Once I'm finishing the form and the form has been validated to what the workflow needed, like comments are required or not, approvers are required or not, once that has been validated and submitted, then the workflow server-side activities start. And this is the section we have here. You can see we can have add activity and add activity group. I'll explain in a second what those are. Currently, this workflow only sends a request approval email. So there's only an email icon. I can expand it and see the email it's sending. I can edit it. This is an activity that I can reuse across multiple workflows. If I'm going to try to add another activity, instead of going to a separate page where I create and manage those activities, we've brought them into the workflow designer. So I can choose any one of my existing activities and I want to reuse that. Sometimes activities can have parameters, so I can reuse the same activity in 3, 4 different workflows and set a variable, a parameter to it. So I can do everything from here, or I can create a brand new activity and then select it and create it and use it in my workflow. So those are our activities list, and it's always growing, and we're adding more as we speak. We're adding, I think, 2 or 3 more activities to that list. So I'm going to go ahead and create my activity, configure it, send an email, copy an item, change column value, whatever it is that I want to do. And I don't want to mess this demo site up. But once I create the activity, I can just go in here and select it, and it'll edit and run them one after the others. So activities are run from the top down, one after the other. And if I want to split, I can add an activity group. And another major improvement we've done in activity group is that we can branch off. So some activities may have output variables that I can go ahead and check for a column value. For example, check the total expense, and then have an activity group where if I expand it, you can see that I can add a condition and I can say this one runs only if total expense details, here we go. Total expense is greater than, I don't know, $1,000. So I can add that as a group and then have a set of activities that only run if that condition is true. The improvement we've added, some of our customers created such complicated activity groups that had 4, 5, 6 different conditions with different and or relations between them. Got quite complicated to add another activity group to negate all those conditions. So we added the else activity group where you can go in here and say, well, if this is not true, let's run something else. So you can run that activity instead. And of course, you can nest those again and again and again. So you can say add activity group, else if the value total expense, or you know what, if the current user is not in owners or managers or whatever it is you want to do. So if it's not in owners, then do something else, do something else. And you can go on and cascade those further and further down. I briefly mentioned that some activities have an output variable, and I can use that output variable in my conditions or in different activities to set those values in. I briefly mentioned it, and I can't demo it yet, but we have a brand new activity that's going to be launched very, very soon that actually dedicated specifically for manipulating those variables, for doing calculations on them. The designer is incredible. I can't wait for you to see that, but unfortunately not something that's ready that I can demo it today. So that's in a nutshell our workflow designer right here and how I created those workflows. I want to show you 2 more things, unless there's any questions to stop me. All right, how did I do that trick, quote unquote, to block you from editing the item when the item was going through the approval process or when the item was actually approved? It's not a new feature, but it's a feature that not a lot of people understood and used, and we have moved it into this workflow designer. It's called default actions. So you can see I can filter my workflows by their type, and right at the end of that tab controller. I have default actions and I can visit it. And there's two things that I can do here. There's new item actions and there's edit item actions. If I choose, I can only choose user triggered workflows in here that have a form. So those workflows have to have an intake form, like the approve, reject. The pay, for example, doesn't have a form, so it's not going to be available for me. And I can choose those workflows to be default workflows for the edit item condition or for a new item condition. That means that when a user visits an item and clicks on visit a list and click on a new item, or visit an item and click on edit, we're going to run all those actions and check which one of those conditions apply to that user. So which one of those actions are available for specifically that user at that point in time of the item. And if one of those or more of those actions are available, they're going to replace the edit item. So if I have 3 of them available, you've seen that screen where I had a choice where the form told me you have to choose one of those 3. On the top ribbon, there might be 5 actions available, but those 3 are default. So if one of them or 3 of them are available, you have to choose one of them. You can't edit the item anymore. And what we've done is we said that approve and reject are only available in certain conditions, but comment is available on any item that's not in draft. So that means any user visiting the list, clicking an item that's not in draft mode, even if he's not an approver, will not be able to edit the item anymore because he'll be hit with the comment action. He has to only add comments. And that's a very simple trick to be able to block users from editing an item that's undergoing approval. Now, we could open it up again and say, well, if the item has been approved and the approval process is finished, then the comments is no longer available. So that means it's not going to block edit anymore. So you can play with it based on your own logic in your own organization.
Sorry, Shai, to interrupt you. We have a question from Tracy. Asking if we had a form with repeating rows, could you run a workflow to approve or reject on each line, or is it like form level?
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. So our repeating rows actually goes and creates items in the expense details list. So let me show you that real quick. Those are the lines that I have. So those are, each and every line is in here. And you remember that rule I had that you can't have an expense over $50 if it's a lunch expense? So guess what? The KWIZ Apps settings work on that list as well. So if I go in here real quick, this is on each and every row. I can add conditions and rules and everything. So I don't have in this demo workflows on this list for every row, but I could. But what I did do here is, for example, column validations that says, here we go, costs. Cost has to be less than or 50 if expense type is lunch. So in short, yes, all the settings that we have on the main list can run on each and every one of the rows. And we can even do the aggregation based on the approved amount. So for example, and I think I had a customer who did that, the customer had a number of the expense amount that the employee put in, and they added another column for how much of that amount was approved. And when a manager came in, they could edit the approved amount and hit save. And we had a total of what the user asked for, and we had a total of what was approved. So if 1 or 2 lines weren't approved, or they approved at 0 or approved at 50%, the expense total would be, the payout would be whatever they got approved. They didn't use it for expenses. They did something similar, but I'm trying to simplify the use case. All right, good question, thank you. The last thing I want to show you is how do you create a workflow from the ground up. And there's 2 workflows I left out of this demo on purpose because I like to show you how I do them and do them with you. So for example, a very basic request when you have an approval is, how do I remind people to approve something if it's waiting for them, right? So an item is waiting for me to approve. It's been a couple of days, I haven't approved it. How do I remind myself to approve it? So for that, we can go to scheduled actions and add a scheduled workflow. And in a nutshell, what I want to do, and then I'll show you how I do it. I want it to run every day at 8 in the morning, and I want it to pick up all the items that are pending approval that were, let's say, last modified more than 24 hours ago, or more than 48 hours ago, and I want to resend those emails, right? Very simple. Of course, I can add a date field for when the approval was requested and look based on that, and add a reminder field, and then look at that reminder field date and check when was the last time I reminded someone. So I can have more complex logic if I want to, but for demo purposes, let's do something simple. So scheduled workflows, approval reminder, remind approvers of pending items. And it's let's not enable it because it's going to bother me for weeks. Run on specific days. I can run it every day if I want to. And when do I want to run it? Now, because we're in a cloud world, and I can be in a different place where my cloud runs those activities. And I know the question is coming up. Where do those schedules are running? I'm going to explain in a minute. But because of the cloud situation we have, so we show you the time in UTC, and we're telling you when is it based on your time zone. So if I want to be on 8 a.m., that's going to be actually 4 p.m. UTC based on where I live, right? So just want to run it on 8 a.m. or let's do it at 7 a.m. before people get to work so we can upset them already. 7 a.m. to get an email from our workflow. And I'm going to apply this. This just set the schedule. When I apply the schedule and save it, what happens behind the scene is in our Azure servers, we don't keep any content, we don't keep any settings, we don't keep any of your information. The only thing we do keep is when you create a scheduled workflow, we keep a registration saying this is the schedule you created and this is the workflow you want to run. And all we have on the server is a scheduler that runs and picks up those workflows on their next available run, and it just goes and triggers them. Again, all the workflows run directly on your server. Content comes from your server. Settings are loaded from your server, from your SharePoint environment. The only thing we keep is that scheduling table. The most important thing on a scheduled workflows, because you don't want to run it on all items on your list, is the conditions. So my conditions are going to be that the approver is not empty, although it should never be, and status is, give this a second to load. I've been having some speed issues lately. And what is the third one I wanted to do? Oh yeah, modified, and modified date. Let me refresh my page. I think there's something going on here. Yeah, I'll just do that. It'll be quicker.
Hey, Shai, we have also two more questions.
Yeah, go ahead. You see, SharePoint
first-
just sometimes just freaks out and becomes super slow for me.
I know.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can the pay action workflow be available on the list view so that multiple approved expenses can be selected and be paid without needing to approve each expense individually?
Great question. Bulk workflows. We don't have that today. We can have that with an easy customization today. What we're planning to do, you see, our challenge is that there's only very specific workflows you can run on bulk. And like we have to check the conditions which are per item. If the workflow has a form, we have to understand what are we going to show you and what fields are you going to fill. So there's a few challenges for us doing it. So that's why I said it's very easy customization. When we do it for a customer based on specific request, we can tailor it for that specific situation. But we found it a little challenging. We're still working on it. It's in our roadmap. We found it a little challenging trying to make something that's like, a one size fit all kind of product situation to do that. The customization is very simple. You can do it yourself. We can guide you through it, or we can do that for you. Because triggering the workflow to pay is a very simple. It's just a web request. So, adding a selector to select the 5 items and triggering all the 5 web requests in the background. It's not too complicated, but still requires a customizations as of today. Here
Thank
you
you.
go.
I hope that answers your question, Alan. We also have one more question.
Yeah.
Tracy is asking, is the number of scheduled workflows, the 200 per month on a tenant level across all lists and libraries?
Yeah, so depends on your license level. There's different thresholds for your scheduling. There's a limit of how many you can run a month on your tenant. Every time a workflow runs, there's a limit of how many items it can run. Now, again, it depends on your license. There's no one number that's correct for everyone. Depends on the number, depends on the license you have for forms and workflows. What I can say, and again, I don't work in our sales, I just know that it exists. What I can say is that if you're a heavy scheduled workflows user, you can purchase blocks. You can purchase additional blocks of executions, and you can just keep it, monitor it. Maybe I can show you here. When you test the workflow, it will tell you how much have you used and how much you still have for the rest of the month. So you can kind of monitor it yourself and see if you need more. Here, let me try to do the conditions again. Approver and status. Status is the one that, oh, there you go. See, this was fast. So if approver is not empty, and if status equals to submitted, so it's waiting approval, right? And the third one is that modified is greater than, and I'm going to do today plus 2. Sorry, modified is less than. I always get confused with that. Today minus 2, right? So if it was modified older than 2 days ago, so 3 days ago, 4 days ago, send another reminder. That's what I want to do in here. I'm going to hit save on that. Now I have my conditions. I have my workflow in here. By the way, the test and check is right here. If you run test this custom action, it'll run on the server and tell you in here a status of like how many items were sent and how many executions you still have. All right, so that's the trigger and that's the condition on it. So for the scheduled workflows, and the activity would be just a reminder. So I'm going to hit add activity and I can do the request approval. I want to do that, but it's a reminder. So I'm going to duplicate this, create a copy of it. And in the settings, I'm going to call it request approval remind request approval, remind approval. Send to approver, reminding him to approve. All right. And we're going to go in here, approver, employee gets CC'd on it, action required. Please review, blah, 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 blah. Hey, approver, friendly reminder, and the rest of it is the same. So by the way, we can, instead of creating two workflow activities, I could create one workflow activity with a variable in here that when I use it, I don't want to go into variables right now in this demo because we're running a little long on it. But I can have a variable here and then use the same activity twice instead of creating two separate activities. So here you go. I created the remind approval and I set this one up in here. And as soon as I save this, that's it. I have my scheduled workflow is going to run every day at 8 a.m. and send me reminders. Any questions so far about the workflow designer, scheduled workflows? And as you can see here, a scheduled workflow will tell me not only the conditions it's running on, it'll tell me the schedule it's running on. Oh, I think I didn't select the right time. Yes, every day at 8 a.m., 7 a.m. We said 7 a.m. and remove the midnight. There you go. That's all I have for the demo for the workflows. Any other questions? Anything else you guys want to see? The third workflow type I haven't showed you, but it's very, very straightforward, is the automatic workflow. Automatic workflow just runs on an event. So essentially, you don't have to set up a schedule. You just do it on an event when an item is added, deleted, or updated. and it'll run there. But other than that, I think that's it.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Shai.
Tracy.
Thank you so much. Please feel free to drop any questions you may have. Also,
Let me
reach
show
out.
you one more thing, actually. You know what? While I got you, I was just thinking about it. I mean, you were asking about triggering a workflow from the list view, which I said requires a customization. But what you could do, and it's fairly similar to how you would customize it, if you go to the layout of the form itself, you can actually add. Let me add a smaller one in here. You can actually add a button, HTML element button. You can actually add a button in here, button properties that runs. Oh, sorry, it'll be in here. That runs that workflow. Sorry, no, that's not the type I wanted. Special columns. Oh, I can't find how to do that now. There is a way to add a button that just triggers your workflow. And just have that button in the form itself, and it can trigger the pay workflow. So instead of having it in the toolbar, sorry, I don't remember where the setting is, but I'm going to look it up after, because now I have to know. All right, that's all I have. Oh, is there a workflow dashboard report on the roadmap? Yes, actually, what we do is we have. Let me show you this page. So this is where we do our script documentation and everything. And in here, we have a workflow history list. So there's two things. Number one, the workflow itself has a history list that we create, and you can kind of go in here and see the history of all the workflow that ran on your list. The second part is that you can actually go to the item itself and view the history of that specific item. And I'm going to show you that in a second as soon as this opens. And the third thing is what Fadwa mentioned at the beginning. If you want to have reports across your tenant, you can use our audit product. And audit would, yes, something's off with my SharePoint today. It's a little slow. Thank you. Here, so if you view an item on the gear icon here, you have the workflow history view, but that's on a specific item. This will tell me if the workflow ran or didn't run, what kind of activities completed, and what are the conditions that it had. And it says, oh, those are the conditions, and yes, they were met. So the workflow actually executed. And the third one is what Fadwa mentioned earlier, the audit product. Audit product runs on Teams, and you can create reports, and you can have those reports auto-generated and remind you and send you information about them. We have, if a workflow fails, oh, great question. A workflow doesn't really fail in the term of a traditional state machine workflow used to. So a lot of workflow engines, they're separate from the forms. They have their own engine, and they call what we call a state machine workflow. So you start a workflow, it's pausing, it's waiting for an action from a user, and they get stuck in limbo sometimes. And sometimes the info came in, the approval came in, but the workflow didn't pick it up. And that's it. Your item is gone, and you can never do anything with that workflow, and it's forever in limbo in your state machine database. Our workflows are stateless. So when you click on a workflow and hit submit, that workflow either finished successfully or didn't. If the workflow finished successfully, it's great. You don't have to do anything about it, but the workflow finishes. So it'll change the status of the field, it'll send you the email, and it's done. The workflow doesn't live on. The next person comes in, is using a different workflow to approve or to reject. If that workflow fails, so you weren't able to submit, then yes, you can absolutely go and trigger the workflow again, because again, those are stateless workflows. They either succeeded or didn't succeed, and they run in one block. Now, sometimes you want to say, well, you know what, that workflow did run, it ran 3 activities, but it just didn't run the 4th activity. And I want to restart the same workflow again. So those are easily done with the bypass conditions or bypass edit things that we do. So for example, on the lists that I work with, on environments that we actually use for work, not for demos, we have users that every workflow is available for them with no conditions. And then we know that if we log in with that admin user, he can always come to an item that's been rejected, that's been stuck in draft or whatever, and he can hard press an action to run a workflow and bypass all conditions. We also usually have an action we call bypass edit that just opens the edit form with no restrictions on the fields. And again, because this is not something we want people to abuse, usually we put it on a specific user and you only sign in with that user. Only a few people can do that, and they have to consciously go and sign in as that user so they know that they're running something they're not supposed to be running. So we very much control this. Okay, possible to mandate yes, absolutely possible to mandate attachments. I shown you the workflow settings. What I didn't show you is actually really cool part of our settings in here. So once I create workflows and user workflows, look at this. I can go to, let's say, column validations. And I showed you how I did column validation, a regular column validation, sorry, on the expense. But look at the comments, for example. I created the column validation on the comments based on a user action. So instead of having conditions based on the status of the item or something like that, I can actually say when the user actually right now clicked reject. So forget about everything else. The status doesn't matter. The item doesn't matter. The user doesn't matter. If the user action is reject, I want you to run this rule to make sure comments are mandatory. So anything I create in the user action can be used in conditions, in column validations, in column permissions, and all those things. So yeah, I can create a validation rule to say that attachments are required. And if I want to, I can associate that with a specific user action. So I can say submit for approval is you have to have attachments before submit to approval is available to you. So if you don't have attachments, submit for approval will not be available, for example. So you can do that on the workflow, and you can do that in column permissions as well. Let me show you column permissions that we have here. Oh, no, sorry, I have it on forms, on the form layout. Where is the form builder? So here, you see that we have the approval tab, and it wasn't showing up, right? So you see the expense doesn't have any conditions, and approval shows up. Oh, well, this one is based on status, when the status equals draft, but I can also add a condition, let's say, or when the user action, so show this when the user action is view, only show it on view, or when the user action is approved, only show it on approve. So you can target those in the rest of the forms conditions are very well aware of the workflow you're trying to run. That's the advantage of actually running the workflow as a part of your form and not as a separate entity than your form. Yep. Okay, let's see the last one. The long-running workflow stored in background database when the workflow is dehydrated. No, our workflows are stateless, completely stateless. They don't keep any information in a database. All they do is they have a trigger, they start, they finish. So when the workflow starts, it reads all the information it needs live in memory, performs the activities it's supposed to perform, and closes. So if you need information to carry over from one workflow to another, usually what we do is we create a column for it and store it in a column, or we create a separate list and store it there. So for example, we had customers using a separate list for two situations. So when a workflow started, they wanted to save a variable somewhere, but they wanted the other workflow to use it. So when a workflow started, it went to another list, create an item with a lookup to the item the workflow is running on, the name of the variable, the value of the variable, and then every other workflow could load that into their memory when they started executing. And when they're done, update the same variable. So that was like a workflow run or something like that. It was on a separate list. Again, we don't keep it on our servers. And the other example was a customer wanted a more detailed log, execution log of workflows, a more audited, detailed one. So they wanted the log to contain information for each and every one step that passed. So what they did is they created a log, their own log list, and they created a bunch of activities to log messages into it. And then a part of the workflow, they started logging information to that list. Main workflow trigger, another workflow passing parameter. Yeah, you can trigger another workflow from the main workflow as long as it's doesn't have a form. Right? Like if it has a form, then it won't be possible. You can trigger it by calling that workflow trigger URL. Or another option is, which a lot of people do, let's say you want to trigger in one list, you want to trigger a workflow in another list. You create in your second list, create a column that your users can't update. So it's a hidden column, for example. And then you create a workflow that runs when that hidden column changes. You can create an automatic workflow that triggers when that column value changed. So then all you have to do in your workflow is just go ahead and update that other list, create a few values in there. If you want to use them as a workflow parameter, use the workflow values parameters in the values of the fields. And over there in the second list, create an automatic workflow that runs every time those variables change. That's an easy way of doing it. But if you want to trigger it based on just calling the workflow URL, you could absolutely do that. So you see, a lot of the things you would do in a traditional workflow on the engine itself, we're just utilizing the platform to achieve. So like the passing parameters or saving parameters between workflows, we're just saying, hey, you're in SharePoint, create a list, manage it over there. Our workflow will read it from there, write to there. And if something goes wrong, you have full control over it. You can kickstart your workflow or fix it. Group approval and rejection. So by group approval, do you mean one of those three people, or do you mean you want to have multi-level? The answer is yes for both. But let me explain how. So multi-step, I actually have a demo for it, but it's a little bit more complicated to show in this quick setup. Imagine very simply the approval I just made. So when the other person hits approve, instead of going to approved status, the status would be second stage approver. And then you have another set of actions, second stage approver. You have to give me the name, or I can automatically choose the manager of the user who approved or submitted. So you have to give me who the approver is. And then you just create two more statuses. So it becomes pending second approval. And then you have the approve and reject for the second stage. And you have to have two more workflows to approve and reject on the second stage. Now, on the second stage, on the reject, that's where people usually choose a different option. You can either say reject on the second stage, go back to the first approver, or reject completely goes back to draft or goes to rejected, right? You have to decide what you want to do. The good news I can share about this is that down the road, not right now, we are planning, because those workflows, we realize a lot of people build them and they're very, very similar, even if they're not exact. We're working on a settings page where you can just say, this is the type of approval I want to, sort of like the templates. So you set up the type of approvals, how many levels, 1, 2, 3 level of approvers, 3 users can approve the first level, only one of them is required, etc. And we will go and just create those activities and workflows for you automatically. We're working on that. It's in the roadmap for this year. I'm not sure exactly when. And the other option is if you want to have multiple approvals in one stage. So you want to say the approvers is not just one person. It's not shy approving. It has to be a member of the management team or IT department. So as an approver, I can just, first of all, the user can select it like I did in this demo. We can hard code it in the workflow settings. So we can say the approvers list is either a SharePoint group we created or choose 1, 2, 3 people, and it'll just work based on that settings that we create. Sorry, let me catch up on the questions. How about main workflow trigger possible group approval? And this context is all persons approved, not sequential approval. Yes. So if you want all people, let's say we have 3 people to approve. very easily, when I come in and click approve, we can have 3 checkboxes, or we can have a counter, for example, for approval. And we can say the people who can approve is person A, B, or C. So when person A comes in to approve and hits approve, there's a counter that will go +1. And you can only approve if your name hasn't been already in the approvers list. The second person comes in. If his name is not in the approvers list, you can have the approve button available to him. When he clicks approve, counter goes to 2. So you can do it with the counter. Once it hits to 3, you know the status becomes approved. Or you can actually have an approval date per approver. So first approval date, second approval date, third approval date. And you can do the same thing. Instead of a counter, every person that comes to approve, you'll go and set the date on their own field. And again, with a simple condition, you can say if all 3 approvers have approved, you have the date for them, then the item is approved. You don't have to use a date. We have a signature pad as well. So you can say when a person comes in to sign, he can actually sign with his finger, with his name, doesn't matter. And then use that as the evidence of you had an approver. And all you have to do is keep track of, you have 3 approvers, which one of them already approved, so they can't approve twice. That's all you have to do. We're happy to show you and build that workflow demo for you with our customer success team if you'd like to see it. Oh, yes, that's one of the activities we have right now coming up on the roadmap. And just so you know, I'm not making it up. Let me see if I can share that a little bit. I'll do that very, very specific. Where is that? Oh, it's in here, I think. Teams. It's in one of those versions. I don't want to go probing around all that information right now, but it's one of those versions. And let me just show you real quick, where can you find that info? So if you go to customer area and go to company and company roadmap, you can see the roadmap of our products. Go to collaboration for workflows, and you can see either this one or this one. One of them has the Teams notification. I'm not sure if I remember which one of them, but one of them has the team notification activity. And we have a bunch more activities planned and added to the product all the time. The team activity, I believe you'll be able to send a message, direct message to a user, or post it in a team channel and mention a user or a bunch of users if you want to. But it'll be very similar configuration to how we send an email. So one place to look for it is here. That's the roadmap. And the other places to look for it is in our public documentation. So if you go in here in the release notes, it would be mentioned over there. So if you go to release notes, just showing you real quick where it is. You go to release notes in forms, and you can see what came out in version 3.0 and what's in version 3.1. And this is where you'd keep track to see where the Teams notification came out.